This is my second video on modal interchange. I'm going to look at some more modal interchange chords and how you can use them. A couple of different tunes that has these chords in them. So the chords we're going to look at is primarily the flat 2 major 7 chord, and then also we're going to touch upon flat 7 major 7, and also the most overlooked modal interchange in my opinion. So I was jamming there on this vamp for a bit, like C major to D flat major 7. It's kind of a common ending vamp in bossa nova music, and it might even be a quicker change, like so the C major would be a tonic, and the D flat major 7 we would call flat 2 major 7. And some of you are saying, well, okay, so it's not modal interchange, because in my previous lesson where I explained what modal interchange is, I said we're borrowing from the minor, relative minor, right? So the 2 chord in a C minor would be D minor 7 flat 5 and not D flat. But I also said, I left a little caveat there are other chords that we could call modal interchange, in my opinion. And this is where some people might have different opinion about this, but this is what I was taught. And one of those instances is the flat 2 major 7 chord, which is very common in jazz. D flat major 7 Lydian shares the same notes as C Phrygian. So we can think about this in 2 ways. I could look at this in like parallel harmony, like it's C major 7, D flat major 7. So like thinking C Lydian to D flat Lydian. Right? So the problem with that's great, and you should be able to think like that, but I think you notice there that there's a tendency that I'm just going to play the same thing that I played a half step up, and it limits me in a way, because I have to think like 7 notes there, move to a new set of 7 notes, where actually a few of those notes are going to be the same. So you want to be able to think of instead of thinking this chord to this chord to this chord, you want to be able to think of something that you can play over the whole thing, more or less, right? And so make it a little bit more like C major to a D flat over C. Just to get that sound in my head, but I'm going to relate everything to the C, if you know what I mean. So I'll make this backing track here. C Lydian or C major, C Phrygian. Right, so it's a different approach. So I can try to improvise like that, just come up with different ideas. Right, so the idea is that you don't want to start on a new thing every time the chord changes. You want to play ideas that move over the bar line and all that stuff, right? So it's also worth considering which notes are the same. So C, obviously, and the G and the F, I think, are the only same notes, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to play the same thing, but I'm going to focus on those notes. you have to be a little bit careful with that F there, right? Because it's the avoid note of a C, but in the more modal context, it kind of works. Okay, so now we have two ways of trying to approach which notes we're going to play over this chord. And how it's also an ear thing, right? You can hear it differently if you hear everything related to C or rather than two parallel sounds. It's hard to explain, but I think you know what I'm getting at. So how does this chord show up, or where does it show up? It could be, let's say you're a 2-5-1 to C major. You could replace the G there, right? It's a common thing to do ending subtunes like. It could also be that vamp thing. So it's very close to if that would be a dominant chord. It's just kind of like a variation of that. Another thing is if the tune ends on C major and the melody note is the C, the tonic note, like in, I don't know, All of Me. You could replace that last chord with a D flat. That's kind of a surprise because the tonic note is all of a sudden the major 7 of the D flat. So and then some C chord. Which brings me to the next point. The most overlooked modal interchange chord is the actual tonic. The tonic, the C, well, we could borrow from any, it could be any mode. But we always, or not always, but a very common thing is to replace it with some kind of Lydian chord, right, at the end there. So which would make it a very, that's a big contrast in sound, right, from D Lydian to C Lydian. If I'm, let's say I wanted to end on a C Phrygian instead, then there's very little contrast or no contrast. So the more you go on the sharp side of the circle of fifths, you're going to end up with a brighter sound. If you go to the minor side, the flat side of the circle of fifths, you're going to end up with a more dark sound, like if you end on a minor chord. As opposed to in my opinion, the whole thing of ending on the Lydian chord is, it's like something we all do. We don't think about that. That's actually a modal interchange thing, right? We change the mode, and why not? It could be, it's a little bit overdone, right? Like, why couldn't it be something else? So that's something worth thinking about. It could be a Mixolydian chord or whatever, but not a Locrian, because that doesn't have a tonic feel to it. Just something to think about. Like, you could experiment with an actual tonic chord and replace it with something else. That would also be modal interchange, right? But we never talk about that when we talk about modal interchange. So what are some tunes? Well, we have You Stepped Out of a Dream, and we're gonna look at this tune Beatrice, and there's a Django Reinhardt tune, Hungaria. I think Django wrote that tune. Those are some examples of that chord that I can think of off the top of my head. So let's look at You stepped out of a dream. So the next the first chord is C major. Let me just pull up this tune. The first chord is C major, D flat major 7, which would be D flat Lydian, and then we have a B flat minor to E flat 7 to A flat major 7. So notice that all those chords are the same scale. Like D flat Lydian to B flat Dorian to E flat Mixo to A flat major 7. So we can use the same scale for all those chords. Again, remember if you watched my video on key centers. Then it moves on to some other keys. So let's look at this tune, and remember that I can treat the first two bar or the first chord change as a parallel harmony, or think of it more like C major going to C Phrygian. It just helps you to come up with different ideas, I think. So here we go. There I just moved the same thing. Here's a chromatic 2/5. So that's a famous tune with a flat 2 major 7. Now let's move on to the next tune, Beatrice. So a lot of modal interchange in this one. Let me pull up the changes. Okay, so this tune is in F. Starts with a flat 2 major 7. Then there's a flat 7 major 7. So that's the next chord I wanted to look at. And again, it's not the most obvious modal interchange chord, because if we borrow the 7th chord from relative minor, we get a dominant chord on the 7th degree. So this is not the most common modal interchange. We would be borrowing from the home key that we're borrowing from would be Mixolydian, if you follow my thought there. So if I'm in F major and there's E flat major 7, that Lydian scale shares the same notes as F Mixolydian. So before we look at the whole vamp there, just might be a good idea to just vamp those two chords. F major 7 to E flat major 7. This is also a common thing to like an ending or an intro at in a bossa nova, for example. So we might want to focus in on, that's a good thing to do, like instead of trying to play the whole tune at once, let maybe focus in on the difficult chord changes, because this is not a chord change that happens too much in like regular jazz standards. It's a little bit more unusual, right? So F major 7, E flat major 7. Again, we can think of parallel stuff, like just moving the same kind of shape around, like which is a great thing to be able to do, and it sounds nice, but we also want to be able to break out of that. So again, if I do this over a pedal note, F major 7, E flat major 7 over F, that's a mixo sound, right? So I'll make a vamp like that. And then I try to think everything related to the F instead. Something that happens is that you can kind of treat everything like some kind of F mix. So George Benson does that a lot. He'll play the flat 7 even though it's a major 7 chord. Like I hear him do that all the time and it works. So I think mix over everything. Especially if it's a quicker change. I'm not saying that you should do that all the time, it's just something that you can, it's something you can do. And it kind of happens if you're just playing by ear, and it's kind of, that would kind of happen anyway by itself, I think. It's one of those things where the theory doesn't really apply to the real bandstand world of things. So, yeah, I think I'm a little bit out of tune here, just bear with me. Okay, by the way, I bought this Polytune tuner recently. Very good. I'm sick of bad tuners, so this was a nice investment. Okay, let's look at the whole vamp. So F major 7, G to G flat, to F, E flat. Those are the first 4 bars of this tune, and I'm gonna vamp that, so get used to that before I learn the whole tune. So let's make it vamp. Parallel. Or more modal thinking. Phrygian, major, mixo. Okay, so I could again make it with a pedal note. That would be like F major, G flat over F, E flat over F. So let's do that. Try to think more modally. Remember again that there's some notes that are the same. That would be the C and the F. Those are the only 2 notes, I think. And the B flat. Interestingly, those are also the notes of the melody. I think I hope you understand what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to approach hearing the changes, thinking of the changes in a different way than you maybe normally would. Instead of just thinking of a chord, 7 notes, to another chord, 7 notes, I'm trying to think of all those chords as a sound which share some notes and some notes are different, and thinking of it more like that, and using the modal interchange concept to approach the chords as sounds. If that makes any sense. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. So let's not look at the whole tune, because you can learn this tune by yourself, I think. But it's interesting at the end there, G minor 7, G flat, F minor. So this tune is in F major, and that's what I'm talking before. Modal interchange of the 1 chord. Ending a tune that's in major in minor is very unusual. I can think of, I think Autumn in New York does that. It ends in minor even though it's a major tune. That's a very interesting thing, because you often hear, or often, but it's sometimes you'll hear minor tunes ending in major, which is by a lot of people considered very, very cheesy. It's like a commercial music type thing, right? It's like supposed to make you feel great, but we never hear the other way around, like a major tune ending in minor. But this tune does that, which I think is interesting. Okay, what else am I supposed to talk about here? Oh, I think that's it for today. I talked about the flat 2 major 7 and the flat 7 major 7 and the most overlooked modal interchange, which is replacing the tonic chord with another mode. And so I'm gonna make like a little essay on my ideas. There's gonna be more modal change stuff coming up, and my Patreons will get access to my compilation of all this stuff in PDF form once I'm done. So thanks to my Patreons. I shall see you next time.